And then something came over him and he said, son, you should be writing in college, not in prison.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Peter O. Estévez Show. This is your host, Peter O. Estévez. And we are here today on a brand new episode 102 of the Peter O. Estévez Show. Very excited to have none other than Ryan Blair today. Ryan is a serial entrepreneur. He's a New York Times best-selling author. And he was a self-made millionaire by the age of 21. Hello, Ryan, and welcome to the Peter O. Estévez Show. Happy to have you today.
Thank you, Peter.
Ryan, you are more than just an entrepreneur. You are a man that has reinvented yourself many a times. You went from a middle-class family to poverty, and then being mentored by a gentleman that was basically in a wealthy environment, and that was the beginning of your transformation. Tell us a little bit about that and about that journey and how it went downhill and then back uphill today.
Well, yeah. So my father was an engineer. My mother was a homemaker, and he did quite well, for him at that time. And we were like the wealthiest family in the neighborhood. I didn't know the difference between the classes, but in the town that I grew up in, making $100,000 a year made you a wealthy individual. And that was what my father was making. And he was very proud of that. And, I got presents underneath the Christmas tree. I got new clothes come school time. And it all got ripped away when my father got addicted to drugs and my mother alcohol. At about 13 years old, I was pretty much on my own. I was forced to flee my family, to live in poverty. I lived in a little turkey coop and, lived in a pretty bad neighborhood and got caught up in gangs and gang violence and a variety of other difficulties. And so I went from the middle class to poverty. And then by the grace of God, my mother found me a mentor, and then I got exposed to the wealthy class. So by the time I was 17, I got to experience all three classes, and it just became very clear to me that I didn't want to live in the middle or in poverty. I wanted to live in the wealthy class.
I often hear you say that. It got very clear to me that I didn't want to live in the middle or at the bottom or in poverty. I wanted to be in the wealthy class. How did you make that decision? How was that decision so clear at the age of 17?
Yeah, it's a great question. I just met all these wealthy people for the first time. I saw their houses, I saw their cars. My mentor lived on a lake in a private gated community, and there was boats in his backyard. And I would meet his friends and other people that were wealthy. And I was like, they're no smarter than me. I could certainly beat him in a fight because I was a fighter. So there's not a single one of them that could take me in a street fight. And then in talking to them, I would say to myself, they're not any smarter than me. I mean, they might have more information, or they might have words that I don't have. And so I saw clearly that it was a small gap that I needed to fill to be in their shoes. Now, that was my overzealous attitude. I've since learned that the gap was a little bigger than I anticipated, but I just saw a gap and I was like, I'm going to shoot for that gap.
Well, ignorance is a blessing. When we're young and ignorant, we shoot for the moon. And if we keep shooting, we actually are able to achieve it many times.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. You went from a middle class, you went into poverty, and then you joined again. Let's talk a little bit about that experience. I'm not so interested about the experience as being a gang member, but I'm interested as to what you learned as an enforcer in a gang.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you said that, being an enforcer. So when you're an enforcer, you're in charge of enforcing the rules of the game, basically, or the gang, I should say. And so that means when, people aren't following the rules, you put them in line. So, I learned a lot. I learned about survival. I learned how to read people. I learned how to avoid getting caught. I learned how to, hustle and make money. A gang is just simply an illegal entrepreneurial enterprise. They just haven't filed their taxes and they're not, doing legal business activities.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of the same principles that are applicable to legal entrepreneurship. And in the legal entrepreneurial endeavors that I've done, I've had mass movements and, large groups of people all representing my brand and, being ambassadors of it. And so, in essence, I had a gang of bad people that I led, and then I eventually became a good person and led a gang of good people.
So what was the beginning of that separation, or that breaking point between Ryan, the gang enforcer, and Ryan, the entrepreneur? When did you, I often say that our shortcomings and our character defects often become our defense mechanisms. They become our survival skills. When you're very young. I also come from addiction. I've been sober 22 years, but I come from very, very humble beginnings. 1 to 13, migrated to the United States when I was 10 years old. My father was a blue collar worker. He definitely never made $100,000 a year that I know of. We struggle for food on our table. Nevertheless, gifts under the Christmas tree. So, but I also learned very early on to see my father, what we call today's side hustle. My father was doing side hustle every single day. He had his regular job, 8 to 5 job, and then he was, hustling scrap metal, hustling whatever it meant to make ends meet. So when did you separate the hustle mentality from a gang leader or gang member, or gang enforcer? And when did you see that you could utilize those tools to become a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, there was really 2 events, and they were spiritual. One was I was facing 4 years in prison, and I wrote the judge a letter begging for leniency. Everybody told me not to, because they said the judge isn't going to read it. And I was in solitary confinement in juvenile detention center in a pretty rough juvenile hall. And I had I was like, I'm writing him a letter, and I kept writing this letter. And I've suffered from dyslexia. I've suffered from learning disabilities my whole life. And so writing wasn't, something that I thought I was any good at. And so I would write this letter, and I'd take the draft of it to the guards, and I'd ask them to spell check it for me, and they'd give me corrections. And so I still have copies of the drafts of this letter. And after I finally got it perfect, after my only job for about 20 days was to figure out how to persuade this judge. And I didn't know what persuasion was. I had no idea what I was doing, but I made a vow and a commitment that if he granted me leniency, that I would, be a better person, and that I would, do better and be better by my mother. And, wrote a really heartfelt letter to him. And I'll never forget, I asked the public defender to hand him the letter. The judge takes it, sits there, and then something came over him, and he said, "Son, you should be writing in college, not in prison."
Wow.
It was the first time an authority figure had ever associated my name with college. Prior to that, it was, you'll never go to college. Your best you could ever do is a trade school. You're going to get your GED. Your high school. I went to what's called a continuation high school. So when he said that to me, I was like, I could be a writer and I could go to college. And a light bulb went off, and I decided that I was going to write my way out of the gang that I was in and the environment that I was in. And so that was the first very spiritual moment of my life, where I knew there was some other force at work guiding my life. From that point forward, I honored the letter that I wrote to the judge. Now, I couldn't do it immediately, because I had to figure out a way to separate from the gang. It's not easy to do. There's other enforcers that are going to try to take a piece of you on the way out. And so the next spiritual event that occurred was my mother started talking to this entrepreneurial guy, and she started dating him, and asked me, or asked him, I should say, if he would mentor me. And so when that happened, the 2 events were pretty close together. And when that happened, I really made a vow to God that I would spend the rest of my life learning from this person, honoring this person. I wouldn't steal from him, and that I would somehow give back. Like, the deal that I made was, if this is my way out of poverty and way out of the hell that I was living in, I would spend the rest of my life giving back. And I made a deep commitment at that moment. And I haven't been perfect in the honoring of that commitment, but it held my values it anchored them windward, so to speak, and held my values together throughout my journey. And so those were really the 2 moments that changed my life, for good, basically.
Wow. I can't help but to think and really want to emphasize the fact that what you heard from that judge, in the midst of all this negative environment, the rejection, being in prison, being ready to be sentenced for whatever number of years in prison, what you heard was the positive message that he was conveying to you, that you shouldn't be writing in prison, you should be writing in college. And
Yeah.
that completely transformed your life. And from there, you went on to build one of the fastest growing companies in the New York Stock Exchange. Tell us about that and how that happened. How did that take place?
Yeah. Well, I was in the gang. I used to steal computers. That was my racket. And at this time, this is in the early 90s, when, computers were extremely expensive. They were rare. And, they were just blowing up. Like, a computer in every household had yet to occur. And so I was on the rising tide of that trend. And I would go to the local software store and I would actually steal software books, and I'd go back home and try to learn how to program these things, so that way I could wipe the identity off of them and sell them on the streets. So that was my racket, basically, in the gang. And so my dream was to get involved in computers and get involved in something to do with computers. So I just so happened to be trained in computers and computer science right when the dot-com era hit and computers, started entering every household and the world took off. And the skill of computer programming and computer operations, was highly desirable and highly compensated. So by the time I was about 20 years old, I went from, working, minimum wage at the time was about $6 an hour, to all of a sudden, I'm accelerating in the computer sciences field and I'm making six figures myself. I actually surpassed my father's income at that time, which was an important thing to me, because I did it at 20, having come from, being a high school dropout gang member, to by the time I'm 20, I'm making six figures a year. And so that was when I said to myself, if I could do this much in that short period of time, I don't want to make six figures a year. I want to make seven figures or eight figures. And, I had a huge aspiration. The math I did was simple. It's like, coming from where I came from, if I could do $100,000 a year, such a short period of time, if I compound that over a few years, I'm going to be filthy rich, right? Didn't work out perfectly the way I had thought it would, but that was enough.
Well, it's worked out pretty well for you, though.
Yeah, mathematically it worked out, but it wasn't. There was a lot of learning. My journey was, filled with, 8 steps up, 3 steps down, 5 steps up, 2 steps down, 6 steps up, 5 steps down, right? But over the period of my 20-year entrepreneurial career, it has ascended, quite nicely. But there's been a lot of ups and downs in there, that many of which were self-imposed. That's why I'm so passionate about teaching now. But yeah, so, I had the right training. I had the right industry. And then I decided to venture off on my own as an entrepreneur at about 20 years old and started my first company. And my first company was just really a learning experiment. And then from there, I started a company called Sky Pipeline. And Sky Pipeline, I ended up raising venture capital and built that into a multi-million-dollar company by the time I was 24. And then from there, I went off and started another company that became, a $600+ million a year company, and highly profitable, and the fastest growing company on the New York Stock Exchange.
Incredible. What does leadership mean to me? What does that mean to? What does it mean to you? How do you define it?
For me, leadership is simple. It's being the best father that I can be, the best dad that I can be. I have a 12-year-old son. And so the thing that inspires me to be the best leader that I could be is, to be an example to him. And if you don't have children, just be an example, be an example. And there's two elements of leadership. There's the internal and then there's the external. And so I power my external by my internal, meaning I spend a tremendous amount of time working on my inner being, through meditation practices, breath work, healing, contemplation, doing deep inner work. And as a result of that, I'm able to externally lead people, because I've built a strong foundation and my cup is overflowing, literally, with the energy necessary to lead people that are a part of my movement, my community.
I love that. But let me ask you a question. Coming from such a dysfunctional background, coming from such a face a father to battle addiction, a mother to battle alcoholism. At what point did you decide that it was important for you to take a look? I believe that leadership begins with oneself, right? Learning to lead your own ship, right? when you learn to lead your own ship, your life, your destiny, and you're able to make good decisions, that allows you to begin to make good choices. What was the defining point where you knew, you figure out how to make money, you figure out how to escape poverty, you figure out how to leave the gang, you figure out how to begin to build a corporate entity that became one of the fastest growing companies in the New York Stock Exchange? At what point did you make that shift? And what was the defining moment that you said, it takes more than just taking care of the companies, it's more about making money. I need to make sure that my soul, body, and spirit is healed, so I'm able to be a highly productive member of the universe. What was the defining point, and how did you come to grips with that?
Yeah, well, see, it's a great question. For the first 20 years, I didn't know how to take care of myself. I knew how to achieve, but every time that I achieved something, because I had a lot of holes in me based on the dysfunction that we described, the holes just got bigger. And so I tried to fill them with bigger objects and more things and more cars and planes. And I thought that would fill the hole. And, there's a few of us that try to fill the hole with success, and we actually do the work to do that. And then we get to that point and we're even more lonely, more upset, more self-medicating and so forth. So I was in that particular position because I tried to fill the hole with accolades and paydays and decadent lifestyle and womanizing and a variety of other things like that. And it didn't fill the hole. It actually made everything worse. And it amplified how big the holes were. So that was the first 20 years of my career that I got a few things right. I did make a fair amount of bad decisions because I was utilizing self-medication. And my mother, though, she struggled with alcoholism. When she married my stepfather and mentor, she stopped struggling with it as much. It became less of an issue. But when he passed away, she went back on the bottle aggressively. And as a result of that, she fell down a flight of stairs and she was in a coma for 2 years. And so, during that 2-year period of time, I was running and escaping from the pain and agony that I would have to face by seeing her in the condition she was in. She would later wake up from the coma by a miracle. It was out of this world miracle. I was right about to take her off life support. I literally prayed to her, "Mom, if you're in there and you want to wake up, don't let me take you off life support." And she woke up, and I had her back in my life for a period of about 4 years after that, although severely handicapped. And so during that time, I was still struggling, seeing my mother in that condition. She'd be going to the ICU all the time. I'd have to go literally give her last rites and pray and say goodbye to her. And she had like 9 lives. She'd keep coming back for some reason. And in 2017, I got a premonition 4 years ago, literally to the date, in October 19th. So, 4 years ago this month, I had a premonition that my mother was going to pass away and it was time to say goodbye to her. It was a voice that came and spoke to me and said, "Go say goodbye." And I went and said goodbye. And as I was praying with her, I prayed for help. At that time, I was struggling with Adderall, and I was struggling taking cocaine and drinking, and I was escaping the pain that I was in. And in a moment of prayer, in a moment of deep spiritual prayer, and connecting to my mother and telling her, "Mom, I got a word that it's time for you to elevate, and I'm going to be with you every single day when this happens." And within 2 weeks, she had actually elevated, and it was out of this world coincidence, right? And in that moment, when she elevated, I said to myself that I was going to change everything about me, that I was going to quit doing drugs. And I really tapped into a spiritual strength to be able to do that. Now today, to tell you I'm on my 4-year anniversary of being drug-free.
Wow. Congratulations. It's interesting, Ryan, the parallels. I too, when, I think the first thing that we need, that we learn very early on when we come from disadvantaged communities, from where we come from adversity and challenges in our homes, that begins to define us. It's scientifically proven that by the age of 5, we have already adopted our belief system, 50% of our belief system. The rest of it we adopt as we go through life, right? So me too, my main priority was to get out of poverty, right? Because I thought that if I got out of poverty, that would solve all of my issues. The reality is that everywhere I went, even with being able to achieve all the material accomplishments and successes, I still carry that broken 10-year-old little boy that migrated from Mexico. They grew up in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home, frame home, that slept in the bed in the living room, sleeping bag with his 6 other brothers. And I still carry that mentality into the boardroom, into the relationships, the partnerships, the marriages. And ultimately, I would end up destroying those relationships. Everything I was building up, I kept destroying because I kept taking the broken little boy instead of elevating him into adulthood. Okay, so I think it's a point that I don't want the audience to miss, because it's so important that you were able, you had already achieved 20 years of success, but yet you were still self-sabotaging. Yet we were still feeling broken. It was not about the money. It was not about the success. Okay. And it was a lining moment that seeing your mom in her deathbed that really awakened you into take some serious and internal personal work that would unslave you and break the chains of everything else that had been holding you back.
The best way to describe it is it was an awakening. And I have no doubt that her spirit was there guiding me, because, when she elevated, she got to see the mess that I was carrying around that she couldn't see, and, what dawned on me was the amount of pain that I went through for almost 7 years, 2 years of her being in a coma, was all correlated to alcohol. Like, the amount of pain every time I had to go to that hospital bed, every time I had to see her with, getting her lungs pumped and had to go just experience the agony that she was going through. It dawned on me, like, it's all alcohol and I'm next. Like, if I don't make some corrective action and corrective changes, I'm going to follow the exact same pattern as her. And my son is going to have to endure this same type of tragedy with me. And so, it became just clear to me that I needed to take corrective action, because I witnessed firsthand, my beloved mother and the pain that she was going through and the pain that my entire family was. And I just didn't want my son to experience that pain himself.
I love that. And I can relate completely to that. I have a 21-year-old son, and I've been sober 22 years, and he never got to see the blunt of the generational curses that I had carried up to the age of being born. And I think that, if we are able, for the men out there in the community that are listening, and also the women, if we are able to break away from those curses, from the social conditioning, from everything that we had adopted from our family, that it's not working. And if it's not working, we need to break it. Tell us a little bit about the projects that you're working on today that excite you. What do you have on your calendar today? What are your projects?
Yeah, well, I'll share with you. When my mother passed away, I took 2 years, and it was at first it was a messy process. I had a lot of healing to do. And so my full-time job was to heal. During that time, I went through a difficult custody battle as well. And so I had over $1 billion of lawsuits that I was facing. I had a custody battle, and I had my own addictions and traumas and things that I needed to heal. So I spent 2 years just going deep, learning and mastering various modalities and methods of healing. And I made the deal with God once again. This is the pattern in my story, that if I could heal, I would help heal as many people as I possibly could.
Love it.
I pledged my assets. I pledged everything that I had, every talent, every skill, everything that I possibly could, give back to others. And so now I've started a movement to do just that, called AlterCall. And, I work specifically with spiritual entrepreneurs that want to accelerate their healing and accelerate their growth, because the two are really combined. The more you heal, the more you grow. And then the more you grow, the more you have to heal. And so as your level of awareness grows, you actually have to go back and heal, false beliefs and false stories. And, every day of the week, you have to heal to grow, basically.
Yes.
And most people don't understand the correlation and how the two are symbiotic, right? Healing and growth. So I help entrepreneurs heal and I help them grow. And that's my life's mission. And I have a community now of a few thousand people that I've helped do that. I started it 2 years ago, and this is what I do basically full time now.
Tell us a little bit more about AlterCall. What is the process? What is some of the modalities that you teach, and who is your avatar?
Yeah. it's the majority of the people that show up are between 35 and 55 years old. So to give you a little bit of demographics, we skew about 50-50 male and female, and they're all entrepreneurs that generally have, a successful business, somewhere in the mid six figures or above. There's certainly some that have $100 million plus businesses, but they're entrepreneurs that have had some success. And as a result of their success, they've now come to that same place that you and I were just discussing, where they realize there must be something beyond this. So that's pretty much the avatar. And most importantly, they're spiritually grounded individuals. They believe in a higher power. Doesn't matter what religion that they believe in. They just have a spiritual connection, and they want to make that a priority in their life. And then what the process that we take them through, we really deep dive into really four quadrants: the mind, and we go through the mind and we teach them how to train their mind through meditation practices. We have a psychotherapist that's a part of our community that's amazing. She actually is a psychotherapist for one of the NFL sports teams, and she participates in developing the individuals within our community. So we go deep into the mind, and we might talk about everything from cognitive dissonance to identity to values to beliefs, and really deep dive into the psychology of those aspects and help them build a new psychology in their mind. We also teach about the body and healthy-based living, and have them go through a process of what we call restriction, where they might implement fasting, or they might restrict from sugar or caffeine or any of the variety of things that toxify us and stop us from having the energy that we need to be able to fulfill our calling. And then the soul. And we teach a variety of practices in those three quadrants, so that the fourth quadrant, which is your role as a father, your role as an entrepreneur, your role as a mother, as a father. So we say mind, body, soul, and role. And once we get your mind, body, and soul aligned, and we're showing a person improvement in those three quadrants, then they're going to really be activated in their role. And things become much easier to learn, adopt, and take action on when you're congruent and you're aligned in the other three quadrants.
I love it. Sounds very similar to my teachings or my beliefs. I believe in what I call the 5 pillars: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and financial. And I think that when you tend to those 5 pillars on a daily basis, you're able to operate from a single state of consciousness. You're not longer time traveling. You're not worrying about the past or the future. You're here in the now and in the present. And when you're able to do that, you operate from a state of flow. You're able to see the world with clarity. You're able to see things as they are, not as you perceive them. And when you're able to see things as they are, you're able to make decisions with clarity. The majority of us, and I'll tell you this because I lived in that state for a very long time. Even at the peak of my success, I still lived in a state of survival because I had not dropped off that Ferris wheel. I have not gotten off that Ferris wheel. I kept thinking like that broken little boy. It was until I was able to balance those areas in my life that I was able to operate from a state of flow and not be in a fight or flight mode. Instead of I be in a flow mode. And it sounds very much like that's some of your teachers. Let me. What drives Ryan Blair? What drives you? What is your driving factor?
The best way for me to describe it, it's innate. I've been so blessed to be born in the time that I've been born, at the place that I was born in America, in one of the most prosperous times in the history of civilization. I'm blessed to be healthy. I'm blessed to have a number of different talents and so forth. And so my job and my duty spiritually is to, put those talents to the best possible use that I can to make the world better than I found it. And so my drive is contribution to others, and to, put the talents and the God-given gifts and the skills and the experiences that I've been so blessed to receive and the mentors I've been so blessed to receive throughout my journey to put into the ultimate use. So that's what really drives me. I don't have a choice. I wanted to buy a private island and disappear. I dreamed about just, canceling, my work. And I took 2 years off, and I thought that I could do that. And there's, I don't have a choice in the matter. I have to see that I'm putting the assets that I've been so gifted to receive to their ultimate use.
I want to go back a little bit into those 2 years that you taught that you took off. Okay. And that was right after losing your mother. And that was really the beginning of the major transformation of who Ryan is today.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about those 2 years and exactly what did you do?
Yeah. So I don't even recognize, I occasionally will see old interviews and I'll look at it and I'll be like, that was me. But there's a little bit of a disconnect because that Ryan was just trying to prove himself at all costs, trying to prove himself to everyone. And, and that Ryan, ran into the ground basically and burned out. And so when my mother passed away, I made a commitment that I was going to set fire to my old identity, because the things that even though publicly, I was New York Times bestselling author and I was this and I was that, it looked like, oh, I had it all figured out. But I got to see clearly that I had, a lot to learn and a lot to figure out. And when my mother passed away, I just saw where I was at clearly. I had a death of the ego experience, for lack of better words, where I saw myself and I was like, man, this is ugly. And the first stage that I went through in the 2 years was I isolated, and I cut off contact with friends and with family and had to go deeply into myself. I did a vow of silence for over 120 days where I didn't speak a single word to a single person. I dove deep into meditation for as much as 8 to 10 hours a day, even more in some days. And I wasn't looking at clocks or counting time, but I would basically start meditating at 4 a.m. and it'd be dark by the time I would stop on many occasions. I connected with nature. I would connect to the cosmos. I would group the full moon and meditate. I would align myself to the sunrise and sunset. I just completely recalibrated myself, to the environment and to the earth and to the cosmos around us. Went deep into spiritual rituals and spiritual prayer and studied a variety of different healing practices like yoga, different Eastern practices, Buddhism. I'm a Christian. That's the Last Supper behind me. But, I raised Christian. It's my foundation, and it always will be. But I wanted to study the practices from a variety of different ancient wisdoms and try to understand them. I went back and read every book that ever had an impact on me and asked myself, from my new perspective, what was it about these works that inspired me? I reviewed the actions that I did, the deals that I did. I reviewed everything. I basically evaluated my entire life during that 2-year period of time and asked myself, what am I keeping and what am I leaving behind? And during that 2-year period of time, I didn't know it, but I was being guided through a process of transformation. And so a number of challenges came my way. It wasn't just like I went into tranquility for 2 years. Like I had to fight through negative emotions, and I had to fight through a custody battle and lawsuits and divesting of assets. And I had to fight through a bunch of things during that 2-year period of time. But each challenge that I embraced and took on, during the 2 years, built me more strength to the point where I started serving others. And I just started helping people for free. I was like, I need to do something other than just, like the internal. I couldn't meditate for 10 hours a day any longer. I needed to actually get out of the internal side of it and actually start externally helping and start getting back out into the world. And when I did that, I'm mentoring people, and I got to see how profound, the impact I was able to make on individuals' lives. And that then inspired me to, begin mentoring more people. And now I'm here today with the movement on my hands.
I love it. And it's very inspiring how you were able to be prepared to serve. That was a time that prepared you to serve. There's a couple of questions that I want to take from there. One of them is, there's this persona, right? When you're in the peak of your success, where how people see you, how the world sees you. And then there's that persona, how you see yourself when you're home alone behind those four walls. How were you able to separate that and say, yeah, the world sees me this way, and they see me as successful, they see me as a overachiever, highly accomplished, but yet I'm still lacking this. How was it that you were able to face that? Because that's something very difficult for most of us to do and say, I need to surrender and I need to work on those areas of deficiencies that I have in order to become a better individual.
Yeah. You know,
maybe a better question.
I got a great. What happened was I only cared about the way the world saw me. That was all I cared about. And I spent all my life caring about the opinions of others, the next news article, the next media appearance, the next title that I was going to win, the next award or trophy, right? That was it. And when my mother passed away, I was like, I would give all of this stuff up for one more minute of hers. And who I really am when I did see myself, and when she passed away, I got to see myself very clearly, you know, in agony, crying nonstop, like in pain, because for the 7 years that she was ill, I didn't address, you know, any of the trauma that I was going through. I compartmentalized it and I buried it, and it all came up and it exploded basically when she passed away. So I got to see myself at my weakest, at my saddest, and look myself in the mirror. I couldn't exist without her. Like, that's how bad it hurt. It tore my heart out. Like, you know, the best way I could describe it, when, you know, I lost my mother, it was like my umbilical cord got pulled out from me all over again.
Wow.
And so during that agony and during that, you know, that painful process, I got to see who my true friends were. I went through a terrible custody battle, which, you know, there were lies told about me to the media in the process. So all of a sudden, I no longer could care about my image that I was portraying out there in the marketplace. People were tearing me apart. Friends were saying I'd gone crazy. It was, I did go crazy for a period of time. I was in such pain and agony. You know, I was, you know, absolutely just divorcing the old world. And so I got to see who I really was at that time, and I didn't like it at all. And so from that point forward, I've no longer cared much about the way the outside world views me. Now, I can't say I don't care about it at all, because we are a social, you know, creature, right? We do have to have some outside perspective of us for us to see ourselves. And so we can't ever say like, oh, I don't care whatsoever about what anyone thinks about me, because it's important what people think about you.
Sure.
To have a healthy balance in that, where you're not just pursuing, you know, life for the likes, or pursuing life for, you know, for accolades and so forth. So to answer your question, you know, I never cared much about anything but the way the outside world saw me. And then I shifted to only caring about the way I saw myself.
Yeah. The reality is that Ryan Blair was always there. You just had to uncover and discover him. But he was the same individual that was fighting to get out of that shell. You just had to welcome him in. Now, let me ask you a question. The average person, Ryan, cannot get away for 2 years, cannot spend 8 hours in prayer and meditation. The average individual cannot go away for a sabbatical for a week, for that matter. They can't even go on vacation for a week. So what are some simple tools that the average individual, and I mean that with a lot of love and respect when I say average. I mean, you know, a person that has not been able to accumulate the means that you have. What are some simple 2-3 tips that they can do on a daily basis to begin to uncover the best version of themselves?
Yeah, the best solution I have to anyone is you have to make the space to achieve a goal. So we all have these goals, but we don't make the space. And so in order to make the space, you have to restrict. You have to restrict distractions, meaning the things that are going to take your attention away from achieving your goals. Social media is a distraction. Overconsumption on YouTube is a distraction. The news is a distraction. TV is a distraction. Netflix is a distraction, right? These are distractions that are literally taking, and if you look at your screen time, which I monitor mine just to make sure I'm not being overly distracted, there's space for each of us to be able to focus on meditation, on healing, and on our goals. But you have to make that space. The other thing that you have to do is you have to restrict the things that drain your energy. You know, I don't believe in time management. I believe in energy management. I'm not one of these people that's going to time block every second of every day in 15-minute intervals. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Because if I'm in the right alignment and I have the right energy, I'm going to make the time to get my day done. And I'm going to look back at the end of my day and be like, wow, look at all I've done. Now, if I have terrible energy, then I have to block out my calendar every 30 minutes and babysit myself all day long because I can't be trusted because my energy is terrible. And so you have to restrict the things that drain your energy. And the primary thing that drains your energy is the food that you eat. If you're not eating food that replenishes your energy, if you're over caffeinating, I've taken caffeine off of my list of things that I put into my body for over a year now, because I drank caffeine to get my energy. And I found that what that did is it depleted my energy. It gave me short-term bursts of energy, but over the long term, it depleted it. So you have to restrict the things that drain your energy. The other things that drain your energy are toxic relationships. You have to restrict that. Toxic thinking, you got to restrict those things. And it's a practice. I had to change and rewire my entire brain in the way that I thought. I'm talking everything from the things that I thought I valued had to be rewired from scratch. And you can do it too. You have more time than you think you have. If you eliminate all of the items that I mentioned, eliminate energy distraction or energy drainers, and eliminate distractions from your life, you are going to find that you'll have at least a couple of hours a day. And the last tip I'll say is make that time, get up super early. I get up at 5 a.m. minimum, sometimes earlier than that, like today and past couple of days, but no matter what, I'm up at 5 a.m. And before I start my day, I have 3 hours of time to myself to do my meditation, to get my workout in, to do my contemplation and thinking through what I want to do in my day, to have a healthy meal to kick off my day. And so I recommend you have to have 3 hours to yourself and to your health every day. And when you do that for enough days consistently, you will have the energy and the time necessary to accomplish nearly anything you set your mind to.
Absolutely. Thank you for such a expansive explanation of that. And the reality is that what Ryan is saying is that you don't necessarily need to give up YouTube or your social media, your TV. You have to be more selective. You have to curate a menu of things that you watch that are feeding your soul, your mind, your body, and spirit. So instead of watching turkey videos, you may want to watch an incredible podcast or an inspirational story or something that is going to feed your soul, your mind, your spirit, something that you're going to learn from. And one of the things that I have learned to do is even curate the people I follow on social media. I want to be able to follow people that are going to teach me, people that are smarter than me, people that I am going to learn from, that I'm going to be able to develop habits, rituals, practices that have enhanced their life in order for me to model them. When you and I were growing up, we didn't have those role models. The role models that you follow were the gang members. And eventually you were able to be introduced to your mentor that completely changed your life. Well, people today have role models, mentors, okay? Social media has democratized, demonetized, and digitized an opportunity for everybody to learn, to follow great leaders, great thought leaders from across the world that can teach us a slew of information that can change our life forever and ever. I want to close the episode with my question, and that is, what was the biggest lessons that you learned from your greatest failure?
I guess I would say my greatest failure was when my mother was on her deathbed. I was escaping, and I wasn't there for her, and I wasn't there for my son either. And he was struggling with autism at the time. And so, the greatest lesson that I have learned is the more that you invest in yourself, right, the more that you're going to be able to be there for your friends and your family. And so I now invest in myself. I hire coaches, I hire teachers, I have a voice coach, I'm learning to sing, I have a yoga coach, because I want to invest in myself, because the more that I invest in myself, the more that I can be there for others in their time of need. And so that's the greatest lesson that I've learned, because the regret that I had, at the end of my mother's life was that I could have been there. I could have been more present. And I wish that I would have had more time with her and been more present during the time that I did have with her toward the end. And so the lesson was invest in yourself, and then you can invest in your friends and your family and your company and your community and the world thereover.
Ryan Blair, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.